Just to refresh your memories after spring break, we were talking about the Congo people who comprise parts of 3 different countries: the Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. Sometimes I'll just be general about it and say Congo, and sometimes I'll refer to some of the different subgroups that arose after the breakup of the kingdom in the mid-16th century. Anyway, we talked about the early kingdom, trade with the Portuguese, conversion to Christianity, and the arts that we know of from these periods. I'm now going to be discussing more recent arts, particularly those that have to do with medicine and with ritual specialists, which are very important aspects of Congo life. We talked a little bit about the Congo view of the cosmos and reincarnation, and the fact that the world of the dead is a world of water. And this is a concept that we're going to see appear in certain ways in art. Well, we had mentioned that the ritual specialist amongst the Congo is called an nganga, N-G-A, N-G-A, and that this is a word that's used actually through many of the Central African regions we'll be discussing in the next couple of weeks. This is an early 20th century photo on the left of an nganga. He is dressed differently from the people around him because when you are a ritual specialist, you're in competition with others, and you make your appearance distinctive to convince your customers of your familiarity with the spirit world. And on the right, we have one of the feathered headdresses that such a ritual specialist might wear. This particular one on the right is made of the tail feathers of the gray parrot. Gray parrot has red tail feathers. There are also a few leopard's claws on it. So it is showing a kinship with the world of nature and with the world of prophecy, since the parrot is associated with speech and with words that come from somewhere else, that is, from the spirit world. And we had also seen some of the objects that a ritual specialist would have worn. These are amulets and charms. They're activated by medicine, which is inserted in them, placed on them, and also activated through prayers and incantations. It's not just to mix things together that creates a medicine, but to put specific ingredients together, some of which are man-made and some of which are natural, while making incantations. And these are not general medicines. They all have specific purposes. We saw also this object that includes mirrors, as well as combs and bells and other paraphernalia, including cloth. Red cloth, I might add. Red is a power color in this area. It's associated with life and also with death, blood. The mirrors, though, are something, although mirrors were imported into this region, they were used to refer to the spirit world, and they were used in 2 ways. They were used to reflect evil back to people who were trying to create problems, but also a diviner, a specialist, could look into a mirror and see into the watery world, the other world. And that idea of the mirror is certainly one that is important in other kinds of medicines that involve figures. So it has, like I said, these 2 purposes, and it also has synonyms that we mentioned before. If you want to talk about reflectivity and mirrors, you are also talking about china plates, which have that reflective porcelain glaze, and also shiny white shells. Ritual specialists knew how to do divination. We talked of spider divination in Cameroon. Divination by a collection of natural and man-made objects thrown from a basket, and their conjunction with one another, their position relative to one another, could be read by a trained person. And sometimes those baskets were closed, like the last example, sometimes open. We're going to see basket type divination elsewhere as we move southward into Angola. But those baskets will be much more consistent than the ones found in the Congo area. Here, for instance, we don't have a basket at all. We have a box that holds the paraphernalia. Box has a head on top, and the objects inside include, as many of these do, quartz pebbles, which often are glassy in areas, and shells having to do with the world of water and the world of the dead. Here, one with a probably a baboon or some other monkey skull in it, and there is raffia work on the skull, which turns it into something other than just a natural history object. Here, two more. Now, these are by the Vili people. I'm going to sometimes mention the subgroups. These are still Congo people, Congo with a K. The Vili live in the Republic of Congo, the former French Congo. And there are some things that are distinctive to subgroups. The broom also with the mirror, the necklace also with a mirror. The necklace also, you'll see, has red tail feathers from the gray parrot, as well as white chalk, white the color of the world of the dead, black the color of the living. There's a lot of red on this as well. And here, a medicine that is bound in red cloth. We can't see what's in it, but there are feathers attached to it, and it is, as I said, bound with twine. Medicines for the Congo people are generally called nkisi, and this is a word you'll need to know. Nkisi, nkisi. And nkisi are objects that have this ritual activation through incantation and a mixture of specific ingredients for one given result. And unless you happen to get the case history of the object when it's collected, which sometimes happens, you don't know what that result may be, or that desired result may be. I mentioned to you that we had some charms with nets on them, hunting nets on them. These are nkisi meant to get somebody, just like you would hunt down an animal, to hunt a malefactor or an enemy. And we started to look at some medicines with figurative forms, like this carved horn that would be stuffed with medicinal activators, and then a carved wooden face that had been chalked up with white clay on the outside. Another work with a mirror. And I showed you also these the skull on the right and the Congo skull on top of a box, and reminded you that when we are dealing with skulls, we have an association with Gabon, which also used bark boxes, but didn't actively refer to these as medicines. And this is a distinction I want you to realize. For the Fang, these skulls are family ancestors that can aid and help the family in their endeavors. For the Congo, these are not family skulls. Any use or references to the grave are for references to the dead, but not necessarily the known dead. And with this, we will get into certain kinds of nkisi in just a moment. I also showed you this bowl that has a sort of a figure, one set of legs, but two heads, male and female, is a beard, with a mirror on it, and these figures are tied down and pegged together. This is probably a medicine that has something to do with love, or marriage, because of the way they are tied, and they're tied together. But again, without knowing its history, we can't be sure. Here you can see an early 20th century photograph of an Nganga with some of his tools. This is one of those nkisi bundles with feathers that we saw just a moment ago. There are horns attached to other objects and calabashes, but this is a small figure. And this is the kind of nkisi most people are referring to when they talk about nkisi today. Now the thing is, this figurative nkisi, they don't make them anymore, and they haven't made them for some decades. There are still nganga, and they still have this kind of nkisi, but the pressures of an increasing turn towards Christianity have pushed these aside, at least for the moment. They've been pushed aside before, so there may be revivals in future again. Here are two female nkisi. Now, in our discussion of nkisi that are figurative, I want to mention a couple of things. One is that there are far fewer female nkisi than male ones, and our knowledge of them is a bit more limited. Apparently, nkisi could be owned, that is figurative nkisi, could be owned by several different groups of people. You might have one that a community would own, generally, and those would tend to be big. You might have one that belonged to a ritual specialist, or you might be an individual that would own one, and those tended to be quite small. When they were major shrines for a community, they were usually not single. They would be a family. So there would be a male figure, one or more female figures, to reflect the kind of natural family entourage that a leader would have. Each nkisi, however, would have a different purpose. Seeing here, these are two photos of the same object, are figures, and this is true of all nkisi, figures that have a cavity in the stomach. That's made by the artist. That would have been stuffed with medicine by the ritual specialist, and usually would be covered up either with a medicine pack or with a mirror. There's often an extrusion, that is, it sticks out, as we'll see on other examples. This one didn't have as much medicine in it. I don't know what its purpose was. Notice the proportions. It's a female nkisi. She has a child. The child is very large, and that may have something to do with the meaning of this nkisi. A lot of the female ones seem to have fertility references, though perhaps not all. You'll notice there is glass or mica or some reflective material in both her eyes and the child's eyes. That's a fairly common feature of nkisi. Her mouth is open. You can see the filed teeth, which were fashionable at the early part of the century. Almost all of the nkisi I show you will be late 19th, early 20th century. There are real beads around her neck and carved bracelets. The knees are interesting in a prominent way, but note the head to body proportions. Her head is about, well, it's not quite 1/4 of her body height, but nearly so. The face, fairly realistic. It's not geometricized. The eyes are exaggerated in size. The mouth's exaggerated in size, but it's certainly recognizable as a human being. Here, two more female nkisi. The one on the left has lots of objects hanging around her neck. Again, you can see a cavity here, but no pack of the kind that's over here. Well, that's because sometimes the owners would deactivate the work before they sold it. They would remove the medicine. And we'll talk about that medicine in just a moment. Let me just discuss this a little bit more. It too has reflective material in the eyes. This is a kneeling woman. Now, what's hanging on her? There are some seeds, there's a bundle of cloth, there are some shells. These are carved wooden bells. Well, carved wooden bells for the Kongo people are usually something they put on dogs. Now, dogs are not kept as pets. They are hunting dogs. So having these bells on this figure suggests, much like that hunting net did, that this figure is meant to get malefactors and bring them to justice. But without knowing the case history, that's only a suggestion. We can't be positive. What's in this medicine? Well, the medicines, as I said, differ. The medicines that are tucked into the body cavity differ from one sculpture to another. And yet there is one ingredient that apparently had to be in all of them. Remember, they're not made anymore. The active ingredient, if I can put it that way, that was consistent was dirt from a grave. The reason is what these figures functioned as were houses for spirits. The artist would carve them. The ritual specialist would prepare the medicine. The medicine would have some of this dirt in it. It would be inserted, and the idea was the spirit, now this would not be a personal ancestor, just a dead person. The spirit would be lured to take up residence in the sculpture. The other parts of the mixture would direct the spirit to use its powers to a specific end. So basically, this becomes a house for a spirit of the dead who is then controlled to do human bidding. Now, the example on the right is an interesting one because the silver backing on the mirror has worn off, so you can actually see inside, which is not common. And you can see some of the ingredients. There are quartz crystals in there, there are seashells, but most clearly visible is a chalk whitened figure of a mother and child. So sometimes the medicine can include carving as well. This would not have been visible when the mirror was new. It would have just reflected. And there would have been reflective materials in the eyes. You can see they're kind of gouged. So this more than likely, from what we can see, would have been a medicine to make women pregnant, meant to make women pregnant. The spirit would be implored by clients to bring fertility. This is a very unusual female Kongo figure. Again, they're almost all late 19th, early 20th century, because it is, first of all, its proportions are a little unusual. The head is much smaller in proportion to the body than it would typically be, although the legs are quite abstract, with the feet being very blocky and geometric. What's unusual about this one is that it contains iron blades. Now, this is something we're going to see on a lot of the male figures, though certainly not all. And it's said that the one purpose of the iron blades is you drive in a nail or an iron blade to wake up the spirit, to activate it, and to get it going. But if you look at this work, it doesn't appear to have a cavity on the stomach, which is rather suspicious. It's quite possible that its odd style, the fact that it's a female but it has these activators, which is really, really rare, and the fact that it doesn't have the medicine pack on the stomach, or even a place where it would have been, may suggest that it is not a genuine work. Here we have a ritual specialist, again an early 20th century photograph, with his nkisi, and this is a big one. You can see its size. It's a standing figure and he is sitting, but it's a large object. He's put a hat on it, and it is covered with leather strands and other objects. The way these nkisi are added to is something that happens over time with clients. Let us see an example. For instance, this one is similar to the last one in that there are leather strands on it as well as a lot of other small objects. Those include some carvings of figures, some what look like small nkisi, some bells, some beads, some other medicines. We don't exactly know what they were for. This is a very deteriorated piece. You can see that termites have eaten away all of its legs. But it's a standing frontal figure. This one does not have an open mouth, though that is quite common. It does not have reflective materials in the ears. We can't see the medicine pack because it's covered with all this paraphernalia. And these are things that are added to the figure after it's carved, not by the ritual specialist, not by the artist, but by clients. Here, too, we have a figure with things tied to it. In this case, red wrapped medicines tied to it, as well as medicine that would be behind this mirror. It once had insertions in the head. There are little holes there and a headband. They were more than likely feathers. A lot of these, this may have had something on the head too, a lot of these works have been stripped by their, either by the museums or individuals who first got them, or more likely by whoever shipped them out of Africa. Here's an example that has several medicine packs that are mirrored off. Some are on the head, There's one on the chest, although it has been wrapped in black cloth. There's another one on the back, which I show you in detail. Notice the use of the colors, the red and white, life and death, or rather the death and afterlife, I should say. And life symbolized by the black. We have shells, again, the other world. We've got a little bit of a hunting net, calabash that has more medicines in it. Depending on the function of any given nkisi, clients might or might not add things. These did not all have pleasant functions. Some were curative, meant to cure specific diseases. Some for infertility, for example, but some for certain types of illnesses. So those were beneficent. But others were meant to hunt down people who broke their oaths, who were criminals. Okay, that benefits society. Still others were used in order to punish people who were your enemies, that is, the enemies of the client. And sometimes there are little packets hanging on these objects that might contain, hair or cloth or nails that belong to the enemy, that would enable the nkisi to find, to track that enemy. This is an incredibly beautiful and small example. This one I will mention specifically comes from the 19th century, because we know when it came into Europe. It happens to be in Berlin. It's a very fine sculpture, quite realistic. We've got mirrors inset in the eyes. Those are to reflect evil. They're not big enough for divination. There would be a mirror and a medicine pack under these bits of fur. And the headband is holding a group of feathers, including red parrot feathers, but others as well, or gray parrot feathers, red tail feathers of the gray parrot. Now, when you see feathers, that does give another hint as to the purpose of the nkisi. Some of these nkisi are related to what are called the spirits of the above. Well, what's above? Birds, yes, but it's not birds that they mean outright. This is an area where the soil has a lot of iron in it. It's what's called laterite soil. Makes it red in color. And when there's a lot of iron in the soil, lightning strikes are quite common. There are violent lightning storms in this part of Central Africa. So the association of birds and thunderstorms and lightning and the spirits of the above mean that those nkisi that carried feathers on their heads generally were associated with violence. And that violence could be socially beneficent, that is, punishing those who are wrongdoers. But power is neutral. A ritual specialist can work power for anybody's benefit, whether it's socially right or not. Here, two other early ones. These are both 19th century, and they both are associated with the spirits of the above, with the feathers still intact. You'll notice both of these are chewing on a root, and that should remind you of those royal sculptures, those scepters that showed figures chewing on roots. You'll remember that the kings chewed those mildly narcotic roots before hearing cases and giving judgments, because their judgments would be neutral. That is, even if they knew one of the parties that was bringing a complaint or defending themselves, they would throw away their personal knowledge of that individual and judge a case on its own merits. So here too we have a hint that these spirits they may be punishing, that is, they have violent abilities, but they are also just and fair, as indicated by the root. Now, the sculptures are not depicting kings. They are depicting spirits in human form, because, after all, these are human spirits we're talking about, spirits lured from beyond the grave to work for the living. This is interesting that this one, too, is wrapped. We saw one other wrapped in cloth, apparently to protect viewers from accidentally seeing the mirror. There must be something particularly dangerous about this example. This is an unusual one. The figure is standing on a tortoise. Most of the time it is just a plain base. These figures of the males are almost always standing. The females sometimes standing, sometimes kneeling. This one has some animal teeth around the neck. This one, as we already saw, the cloth. Inset eyes here, missing insets here. Here, another early 20th century postcard showing an nganga with a group of nkisi and other medicines. Some of these nkisi may not be nkisi. They have nothing inserted in the stomach. We have figures in European clothing, a hat and a cane, one riding, or two riding an animal. But these are most certainly nkisi. You can see their projection from the stomach that has been sealed off, both of them associated with spirits of the of the above. They also have raised hands. Now, we haven't seen that yet, but that is, again, a common example. Nothing in the hand, but there will be a small hole. Some of them apparently held weapons, spears or swords, but these were not carved from wood, and in almost all cases they have vanished. Here we have a 19th century engraving showing an nganga with his own feathered hat and a rather large nkisi with feathers. It is stuffed full of nails, as is this example. And this one has the raised hand that held something. The mirror and medicines are intact. Again, this is meant to indicate that the spirit has been woken up, but it may have, in particular cases, more going on than that alone. In some examples, for instance, we have stories of cases where a dispute would be brought before an nkisi at the beginning of the 20th century. Two parties, and perhaps they had a disagreement about land, and a judgment was given as to whose land it was, and the parties agreed to the judgment. They would each spit on a blade of iron or a nail, and that nail would be driven into the figure. That acted as a kind of DNA for supernatural purposes. If one of the parties later broke the oath, the nkisi would sense this and supernaturally advance and punish the person. So that retribution is a possibility. And of course, raising a spear or a weapon is another punishment or violence or ability to inflict, all of these concepts that frequently went along with the male nkisi. Here, two more with plenty of nails. This one, the mirror is missing, even though the place it once was is there and sealed off. Here, even the face has these nails in it. And most of these originally had clothing, whether it was raffia or a bit of cloth, they were clothed. This is an interesting one because as we get more and more nails, think of the effect. If you come for a cure, or you come for justice of some kind, some of these people would travel 300 miles on foot to get to a particularly well-known regional shrine that had nkisi. And you see an nkisi full of nails. That attests to satisfied, one presumes, clients. An nkisi that is a worker. If it's a brand new one and it only has a few nails, you wouldn't perhaps have as much confidence in its abilities yet. Here are two more. Now this one actually does have the spear. Although there are so few that do, I sometimes wonder whether this is the original spear or some collector just put it inside. Here, an iron bell, the mirror, mirrored eyes, probably things missing from the upper part. But so full of nails, it takes on a new texture. These two nkisi, and always notice the style. Some are more realistic than others. Some have very squat body proportions where the head is almost, well, this one it's about a third if we're not counting the feather bonnet. And this one nearly the same, just 1 to 3 head to body proportions. We again have mirrors. This one has a blade in its hand as well. But what I'd particularly like you to notice on this one is each of them has these bamboo tubes hanging on it. These are called cannon because they somehow resemble a cannon. The idea is that the nkisi will use it to shoot supernatural medicines at enemies. Here two more. These are both interesting. These are very large figures because instead of the mirror in the stomach, the cavity is sealed with a cowrie shell. Again, it's a reflective white material, and it looks like shell or porcelain has been inserted in the eyes instead of mirror or glass. Notice that sometimes the faces are painted with almost what you might call tear tracks in red and white. And there's a medicinal beard on this one, a paste that's been applied with animal hair below. Again, usually they were originally dressed. This one is not. Occasionally you'll see nkisi that are animal shaped, and this one is missing its medicine pack. It's been removed. This is a double-headed dog, somewhat abstract. Now, why a dog? Well, dogs and cats through much of Africa, not just Central Africa, are considered to be not domestic pets, but workers. Cats might be allowed around generally to get mice and rats. Dogs are useful for hunting or for keeping away criminals, but they're not usually allowed in the house as pets, even up till now, unless somebody has lived overseas where that happens. I mean, there are people that have them, but it is still uncommon. And the reason is that both dogs and cats are associated with witchcraft. And not that they themselves are witches or anything like that, but because they have an affinity for human beings. You know, a dog or a cat has a better sense of hearing. They sometimes will know someone's coming, and you'll know they know because their ears will perk up or they'll suddenly become alert before a human being is aware of them. Then this made people see them as something more than other domestic animals. The belief is that a witch can use these powers and occupy or direct an animal to feed it information. So dogs are, for the Kongo people, a sort of a nebulous creature. It is believed that they live on the border of the living and the dead, and that they can see in both directions, which is why this one has a double head. So occasionally the nkisi will have a dog form, an animal form. Also, other creatures may show up as nkisi. Here on the left, and I'm sorry there's only a head view, we have a Westerner, a European, wearing a pith helmet, the kind of helmet that explorers and colonial officials wore in the early part of the 20th century. He has an open mouth, like many nkisi, and you'll remember for the Kongo people, the open mouth signifies not ferocity, but the continuing conversation between the living and the dead, this permeable border between our worlds. But whereas this was the early 20th century that this was made, and you'll remember the aristocratic Kongo people filed their teeth into delicate little points. Well, this guy sure doesn't have filed teeth. He's got big, ugly teeth. And that tells you that they think he's fairly uncouth and uncivilized. He has been painted with white chalk, not because he had white skin, but because he is a creature from the other world. So what his particular function was, we don't know. On the right, we have a figure astride an animal. If that's meant to be a horse, the artist does not seem to have been interested in portraying it accurately, but he's riding something. What's of interest there is that hanging around his neck are several crucifixes.